So I'm going to hand over to Noel, but like I say, you are in for such a treat this evening. It's absolutely fantastic. So sit back with something warm or something alcoholic and enjoy.
We're going to be going to India this evening. Now, it's probably 7 or 8 years since I was last in India. Before that had been, something probably about half a dozen times. And landscaping in India, or gardens, were not something that really had much of a profile. Most design landscapes seem to be either Mughal or British designed parks. Many urban landscapes were struck me as never designed in the first place or degraded. But the only bit of nice planting I ever came across was sometimes in the gardens of posh hotels. But since then, an awful lot has changed. And about a year ago, I started looking at the website of a landscape company called Prabhakar Bhagwat, which is the oldest landscape design company in India. And I was really astonished at the range, size, the quality, and the public spiritedness of what they were doing, backed up with a lot of research. And one of those websites is just very generous in not just showing you what they are doing, but also in sharing resources. And we began to talk to them, and finally we arranged to commission a presentation, an interview with Aniket Bhagwat, who is the director of the firm and the third generation of his family to be involved in the firm. And of course, because of the time difference, we made a recording. And so unfortunately, there won't be any opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Bhagwat. But Annie and I were delighted with this interview, and followed by a presentation. And we hope to be perhaps doing some webinar type work with people in the company at a later date. So I'm going to play the recording. Screen share. So this is our interview. First of all, our interview with Mr. Aniket Bhagwat, and then he will do a presentation, which I can tell you is a real visual feast. So, as I understand it, it was your grandfather who established this practice. He sounds quite a remarkable man. Could you tell us about him?
So this was, I think, in the 1930s, and he was an accountant, and he was working on a flower farm somewhere near Mumbai, and he had come to Pune to look for a job, and as it turned out, there was a job opening in the Empress Botanical Garden, and the accountant had swindled some money, and so the accountant had been sacked. And so they were looking for somebody else to take over the job. And he seemed to have a head for numbers and so on and so forth. So, he got the job as an accountant there. And then, of course, by the 40s, by the 38, 40s, it was quite clear that the English were going to leave the country. So they were beginning to sort of hand over responsibilities. And they were wondering who was going to become the superintendent of the Empress Botanical Garden. I mean, there was nobody really trained for it, but the Botanical Garden obviously didn't have too much accounting to do. So the little bit that he did, and then he spent all the time learning plants and walking around and seeing what the operations were. So he had learned quite a lot, and it seemed that he was a good choice. And so the British decided that this young Mr. Bhagwat was a good candidate to become the superintendent of the Empress Botanical Garden. And that's how his life started. Mm-hmm. And in those days, of course, when the English left, the state of financial affairs of the Botanical Garden weren't very good. So he had to really sort of find ingenious methods of working with flowers, going and doing little gardens for the royalty that was still around to sort of make it financially solvent. And that's how it started. And that's how my father grew up on this botanical garden. And he learned plants at a very, very early age, around the time when he was, 5, 6 years. He used to spend time with the gardeners. And then as he grew up, it seemed natural that, he would study agriculture. So my father sort of made a deal with my grandfather and said, if I do well in my agricultural education, will you spring some money for me to travel abroad and learn? And my grandfather said, sure. He didn't think that he was ever going to do well, but he did well, and he taught. And so the money was raised, and he went to Denmark. In those days, there was one program that was called certificate or diploma in garden art. There was nothing like landscape architecture still. And he did that program in Denmark, and Sorensen was one of the teachers there. And, Sorensen invited him over because he had a good hand and said, why don't you come and work with me for some time? And my father kept on saying, look, I really want to be somebody who can design gardens, somebody who learns this formally, somebody who, I don't think the term landscape architecture had percolated in those days, but clearly he wanted to do that kind of a work. And so Sorensen told him, look, there's a program that's starting in Sheffield, and Brian Hackett is heading that program. And I think that'll be very good for you. And that's how he went from there to Sheffield, studied at Newcastle on Tyne with Brian Hackett. Brian, till he passed away, was very close to us as a family, and learned there, and then came back to India. So yeah, that's Genesis. And each generation, well, the third generation depletes in talent, but nonetheless,
I'm sure
it continues. It
yes.
continues. Yes.
So, thinking in terms of landscapes, particularly public landscapes, I reckon it's probably 7, maybe 8 years since I was in India, and a lot has happened in that time. And certainly looking through your website and other websites, it does seem as if there's an enormous amount of new work being done in India. How would you describe the current status of landscape architecture in India?
So I think, it's a longish answer, and I think it's a 2 or 3 pronged answer. So let me sort of try and be brief. First of all, the landscape profession in the country is still a nascent profession. The first program, educational program that started in India was only in 1972. Unlike a lot of other parts of the world where you can sort of learn to become a garden designer or a landscape architect, in India, you have to do 5 years of architecture. So you have to do 5 years of architecture, and then there's a 2-year postgraduate program in landscape architecture. This is in 72. And even today, as we speak, there are barely 4 colleges in the country. So first of all, there are not too many professionals in the country. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that post-independence, I think the country's priorities were different. So when we got independent, the priorities were really housing or getting food to the poor and so on and so forth. But with every decadal growth, those priorities have kept on changing. So from these basic issues to institutional building to and so on and so forth. By the 1980s, from a very slow, plodding, socialist manner of running the country, India opened its gates to sort of liberalism in a significant manner. And since then, I think the country has exploded at all levels, at all levels of industry and so on and so forth. In the same time, what has begun to happen is that political capital is no more to be received by talking about feeding people, or no more to be received by saying we'll deal with the villages, because that, to a great extent, a lot of good work has happened there. And so the political gaze has also shifted to cities. And with the fact that this has shifted, what has begun to happen now is that people are saying, let's get public spaces in our cities to be done in a better manner. So in the last 10, 15 years, suddenly you're beginning to see a lot of attention that's getting into public spaces in cities. But this is coupled with the fact that there aren't too many experienced professionals who have dealt with this kind of work. So they are also learning. I mean, the Indian reality is the Indian reality. It's not, even the Singapore reality. So to deal with our reality, our population, our budgets, our usage of spaces. But I think in the last 7, 8 years, we've done reasonably fine. I think that suddenly in all the cities across the country, smaller towns, smaller cities, in some manner or the other, you're seeing huge amounts of efforts that are going into public spaces. Do I think at a critical lens, is the quality of the work that is being done good? I would reserve my judgment. I don't think that is the case. But the fact of the matter is that, in fact, a lot is being done. So I think the canvas has changed. And I think in the last couple of years, you're suddenly beginning to see very good work that's comparable with anything globally, that's beginning to appear in bits and pieces across the country. So, yeah, I think that's the kind of evolution that this country's gone through or going through.
I've been very interested to read about some of the public projects, the restoration of the Victoria Gardens and Ahmedabad city centre, and then this organisation, the Parks People. Could you tell us about them, please?
So this is interesting because, it's a story worth quickly telling. There is a very large corporate house in India that manufactures pharmaceuticals and does power distribution in cities, and they happen to be old clients and friends. And at some point, about 8 years back, I was at their place over for dinner, and we got in a conversation on the idea of patronage. And I was saying there are two kinds of patronage. There is something that I would like to call sustainable patronage, and there's something that I would like to call real patronage. So what did that mean? I said, well, when you open a school or when you sort of, fund a hospital, that's kind of sustainable patronage because you put in the money, but it's possible for you to, well, recover some amount or at least deal with its operating costs. But real patronage is where you give money and you forget about it. I mean, it's never going to come back to you. You're not going to be able to create an asset. And I said, great things in society have only happened because of these ideas of real patronage. And so that led to the question of saying, what would that really mean? What would that really translate? And so I said 5 things, but among the 5 things that I said, one of them I said is that we really need to look at public parks and or public spaces in our city at least. And he said, well, why don't you helm it? Why don't you run it? So we created this little group called the Parks People. And the idea really was to walk up to the municipal authorities, take land that was allocated for public parks, completely redesign them, rebuild parks, but not stop there, to then go on and say that we will take or maintain them for life. Now, that's the difficult part. It's one thing to give money for the development. It's another thing to adopt something that's a public space and to say, I'm going to take care of the gardeners, the electricity bill, the security people, whatever, for the rest of my life. When we started, I didn't think it was going to become this big. I thought that we would do a couple of projects and, the interest would wane or the effort behind it would diminish. But now after 7 years, I find that we've done 15 public parks in Ahmedabad. We've done 2 public parks in a city that's nearby. And we are right now, as I speak, we are launching work on 3 more public parks. So that's 18 public parks in a period of 17 years. Not all of them are big. Some of them are, like the Victoria Gardens are large or the Parimal Gardens are large, but some of them are very small. They're pocket parks, they're neighborhood parks. But you have to come and see it one day because everybody who sees it, and I continue to believe that they sort of are extremely conscious about how water is used, of how water is recharged, about how lighting is done, or how the night sky is not affected, or how biodiversity is looked at, plant diversity is looked at, how street furniture is done, how universal access is done. So it does everything that it needs to do, and I think they're beautifully maintained. So it's very heartwarming, and yeah, it's an extremely heartwarming part of our lives.
Interesting, and hopeful. So I was wondering about historical models, because it seems to me that in every culture around the world, gardens and landscapes have depend a great deal on historical models. And I was wondering how this works for India, because the examples of historic landscapes we see are, on the one hand, Mughal, with this sort of classic Persian Chahar Bagh, and then of course the British with their parks, and of course in the current political climate of Hindutva, putting original Hindu Vedic ideas forward, these models these cultures are being very much rejected, from the top down. So how does this play out in terms of historical models, or perhaps you are able to approach in a much more fresh way? You're smiling. You obviously feel confident that you've got an approach that is truly a breakthrough.
I mean, the very question that you are posing me today is a question that we posed ourselves about 9 or 10 years back. And, I'd been working for many years, and I said, what is the Indian garden? And, India, of course, as you know, is a very big country. It's got every climate variation in the world. It's got huge cultural diversity. We speak so many languages. So first of all, I think the notion that there can be one singular idea that is an Indian sort of idea is wrong, because India is literally 40 countries put together. So there will be many, many different ideas. So we launched something that was called Tracing Narratives, and it was a search for the idea of the Indian garden. And so we wrote to people all across the country and said, look, if you can come across anything that you think is a good example of a garden, historic, modern, whatever, please send it to us. And we started getting a lot of examples coming from all parts of the country. And we realized that there was really no physical manifestation that held it together. They definitely looked very different. The planting was very different. The structure was very different. The spatial sequence or the scenography was very different. And yet we said there has to be something that ties it all together. And slowly we began to find that what really does tie it all together is the ritual of the Indian garden. So it's not so much whether it's this style or that style, but the idea of the Indian garden from the Vedic times or from the writings of Kalidas, or the way it has been described in Shakuntal, for example, are about gardens where the ritual of human life is enacted. And that ritual of human life can be enacted in many, many, many different ways. It could be religious rituals, it could be social rituals, it could be cultural rituals, but there is a ritual that is very deeply connected with the idea of the garden. And I think that's what really ties the idea of the Indian garden well. The Indian garden is many different things, looking completely different, had different planting palettes, different structures, different typologies. They could be small gardens, they could be gardens connected with temples, whatever they are. But the idea of the ritual in the garden, the idea of finding the human being, and the manner in which he or she will be engulfed by this garden and react to the garden, both in soliloquy, in quiet prose and quiet conversation, but also in a group, is, I think, what really seems to be the tying thread between gardens in India.
Interesting. Right. Now, we have a particular interest in planting design, but good planting design is dependent very much on the nursery trade. So, I mean, how is the nursery trade developing, and do you feel that as a business you are able to get the plant material you want, or whether there are any particular relationships between yourselves and the nursery industry to expand that diversity that's available?
So, I mean, when you compare the nursery trade with what you have in England or other parts of the world, I don't think that we have a nursery trade in that sense. So today, I think over the years, from the time that my father practiced it, and we continue today, is that, we are deeply aware of the kind of plant material that we want to use. Sometimes we can go and source it out from forests or from people who have them as saplings. But we've slowly, the nursery trades have reacted to this fact, and they started stocking the kind of plants that we would like to use. So things keep changing from the nature of species that they're beginning to stock. So I think in that sense, it's a fairly proactive relationship that seems to have now seems to be emerging in the country, where the nurseries are they're listening to garden designers or landscape architects and saying, okay, fine. So if this is what you want to use, then we don't have it now, but give us some time and, we'll try and put together this palette. So I remember about 14 years back, we had done a house, and once that PowerPoint comes up, hopefully I'll be able to show it to you. And where we just wanted to use all kinds of wild grasses. And, there was no nursery that used to stock those wild grasses. And so we went to riverbanks and we sort of found those tufts of grasses and planted them. But the landscape turned out fine, and the nursery people saw an opportunity in that. And as a result, they've done large nurseries now that just stock wild grasses. But so there is this very, very symbiotic relationship with the nursery people and the designers. That's the good part. The not so good part is that you are unable to specify plans based on height or growth or caliper or any of it. I mean, finally, you just have to pick up, 6-month-old or 1-year-old saplings. And that's the palette that you have to work with. So it's impossible to install a garden that is reasonably mature, where you can begin to say, look, I really want something that's 5 years old, but I want the entire plant palette to be of, matching sort of growth rates or situations. That I don't think still happens in the country. But are we sad or are we worried about locating the plant? But not really. We are just finishing a public garden right now in Ahmedabad, and it'll open up in 3 months. And I've got a circle in that public garden, which I call the history circle. And in that history circle, I want to plant plants which are linked with the history of the city. And this was the capital of textile, and indigo was a very big thing. This was one of the biggest trading centers for indigo plants and indigo dyes. And of course, they're not available in the nurseries anymore. And while you can get, seasonal, annual indigos, to get perennial indigos is not that easy. Similarly, to get perennial cotton is not that easy. You can get something that's seasonal. But the nursery people are going all out, and, they're digging out from somewhere or the other, and slowly they're putting it together. So I think in that sense, there is support and there's appreciation of somebody trying to do something different, and which I think is hardcore.
Yeah. And maintenance, planting a garden, a landscape is only as good as its ongoing management. What is currently the situation with maintenance? And I was thinking particularly in terms of the training of staff, the status of staff, or new thinking about how design and management can be more integrated.
It's not a good space. It's not a good space at all. So, in 87, when I was young and I started doing a lot of work and I used to do 20, 30 homes every year, I felt very proud of myself that I was doing a lot of work, and I would do it for 1 year and the second year and the third year. But after 4 years, I started going back to these houses to look at, what we had done, and there was nothing. I mean, they were gardens that had disappeared because nobody was taking care of them. Nobody knew how to take care of them. And I sort of realized that if this continues, I will be a landscape architect who will have nothing to show. And so realize very quickly that the culture of maintenance is what you need to build in the process of design and execution. You can't wait for it to happen after the project is over. So very early on, even when you're starting to doing the drawings, when you're walking up to the site, you're beginning to inculcate people into the idea of what it will mean to take care of landscapes such as this. So in that sense, we've been lucky. We've been lucky for the last, I think, about 25 years now. But in general, I don't think that there is a good process of trained personnel who understand design ethos, who understand plant material and its requirements, who can actually be entrusted with taking care of landscapes. It's a hit and run thing, a hit and miss thing. If you're lucky, you will find a contractor who's empathetic to that idea. But it's usually the only times it works is when you are being able to enthuse everybody on the site, including the gardeners and owners, to say, look, we're doing something precious and this is going to need some taking care of. But it takes a significant amount of our time and effort. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
I've got a question, Noel, actually, if I can chip in. Looking at the scope of this is so interesting, and looking at the scope of your work, it's just absolutely breathtaking. Funding for public projects in India, how difficult is that? Does the money come from the government? How are public spaces funded generally, or is there no general sort of situation?
So, just to continue from what Dr. Kingsbury asked me earlier, and I said what has happened, of course, in the last 5-7 years is because the attention of the governance has moved to cities and towns, and it's no more the villages. I mean, India is also becoming urban. India used to be about 75% villages and 25% in the cities. But now for my state, for example, Gujarat, we are already 60% urban and 40% rural. So I think that balance is also beginning to change in the country. No, because the attention is getting to the cities and politicians realize, or bureaucrats realize that, for them to demonstrate work beyond doing good drainage and, good roads and, hygiene and so on and so forth, if they have to show something to people, it will have to be public spaces. And as a result, the funding on it is not a problem at all. I mean, it's just not you have to be a credible designer, of course. You have to be a credible office. If you're a credible office, funding has not come in as a conversation piece for as long as I remember. The problems come in implementation, but not in. There's huge amounts of money. Nobody knows how to spend it. I mean, so that's
yeah.
an
I'm
interesting yes.
also fascinated by your studio. How many people? You seem to have quite a wide range of people with an amazing spread of skills. How many people do you have in your studio?
So we have 2 offices. I mean, where I sit is the bigger, well, out of the 2, the bigger ones. And I have a smaller office. We have a smaller office in Bombay. But between these 2 places, we are about 55 people.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
And are they mostly trained in India, or have many of them had a training overseas?
So I think most of them are architects or landscape architects trained in India. And there's always a few of them that have gone to the US, have gone to Sheffield. I send a lot of my students there.
Good old Sheffield.
Yes, I've certainly met some of them, certainly taught some of them. Yes, yes.
So a lot of my recommendations are to kids going there. So, I think I'm sure by now they have a small side department just for students that come out of our studio, because every year 2 of them are going there. And then some of them come back, and some of them come back, some of them don't come back. So it's a mix. But most of them are trained in India. Most of them are trained.
And in India, is there a culture for garden designers or landscape architects? Are there people who practice as garden designers?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes, very much they do. And there was this book, I don't know whether you've seen it. It's called 250 Things That a Landscape Architect Must Know. And it's a recent book that's just been published. And in that, they invited 50 landscape architects from all over the world to say 5 things. And, so I was invited for one of them. And in those 5 things that I said, one of them is where I talk about this false schism between a landscape architect and a garden designer.
Yes.
And I find this hilarious because, I come to London and I hear the same conversation. I go to Ireland, I find the same conversation. I was in Stanford recently to give a talk, and there was the same conversation. I'm in Australia to give a talk, and I think it's an artificial divide. It's a complete artificial divide. So first of all, I'm not a big fan of that divide. Having said that, of course, there are some people who are garden designers. I find that those who are garden designers, or want to call themselves garden designers, are particularly good at plant material. They have a far deeper understanding of the soils. They have a far deeper understanding of just the insect life or the bird life that is going to happen. Landscape architects by training don't always have that depth of understanding.
Yeah.
They have the appreciation for it, but I don't think they always have the depth of understanding. So, and I think it's a scale and typology related thing. Landscape architects tend to deal with different scales, with different complexities, whereas, but I mean, I believe that at the end of the day, the garden is the genesis of it all. So, you know, that's your laboratory. That's where you learn to do things.
Yeah, yeah. And here in the UK, a lot of studios now are hybrid. So you have landscape architects working alongside garden designers and ecologists, so that you've got that wonderful mix of skills, which is the right thing to do. Yeah.
So, for example, we compensate that to a certain extent. So, you know, luckily our studio, largely because my father, you see, studio, of course, and, you know, 51 years now, we turned 15, 2024. And the studio does all kinds of work from extremely large cities. I mean, at one scale, we are doing a city that is a city for 2 million people, and we've been working on it for about 11 years now. And at the other end, we do very small gardens. So scale really is not important for us at all. What is important is just the quality of resolution or the kind of work that we can do or the thinking that we can bring behind it. And then the other part of our studio is something that's called LEAF, which is Landscape Environment and Advancement Foundation. And that really is concerned with research and giving out grants for publication. So we've done recently a grant to talk about wilderness planting, or just the idea of what is the wild in its partial construct. We are right now working on an exhibition on the garden histories of Ahmedabad. So it does a lot of research work, and that's like a full-fledged part of the studio. What I really have is a bunch of projects that I would like you to see, and I'll try and show them quickly. This is something that happened in 1982. This is done by my father. He saw a basalt quarry one day and decided that he was going to make it a forest. The client thought that the sun had gotten to his head and rushed him to the side. I rushed him to the side of the hill and got him lemonade and sent it back. And then in the evening, of course, he said, you know, asked him again, saying, "Are you serious about the forest?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, let's do it." And he, you know, when we asked him as to why do you think you can do it, and he said something that actually Brian Hackett had taught him, and he said that, you know, if you give nature the chance to heal, it has the power to heal itself, and you just have to give it that sort of power. So he worked on something like this, completely devastated, solid rock. That's him working in the garden. On the right-hand side is a picture of him in a much later date. The young man with him is the person who was assisting him then. The person on the bottom right is the same person now who takes care of this development. So that's the quarry. The process of work was quite straightforward. You have excavation. Once it's done and the rock is taken out, you overlay it with soil. You find soil which is rich and laden in seeds, and you spread it over the ground. You wait for the first monsoon to come, a microclimate gets created, and then you start planting trees. And so and there was a nearby stream. He managed to tap that nearby stream, and that became a lake. And something that is on the left is what became, which is the image on the right. So you could actually take a very, very difficult basalt quarry and convert it into a forest. Some images of it. It's been many, many years now. As an office, we continue to keep going to this place. It's already changed 3 owners, but each new owner respects the fact that here was a place where nature was allowed to heal. So they really don't want to make any commercial gain out of it or monetize it. They just want it to remain as a little fragment of nature. This is a project that's kind of new to me. We had gone to Agra and we were looking at one of the first gardens that happened in India. This is Babur's garden, which is Rambagh. It's on the river, and it's one of the first Mughal gardens in India. And we were deeply impressed and fascinated by the plan. And as you're on the right-hand side, you can see it's just a grid of spaces, and you walk on the grid, and you think you're walking in similar sort of spaces, but as you sort of traverse the grid, you know that your body is moving, but your mind doesn't register that movement, and you keep seeing different things. So it's a surreal experience to sort of walk this grid. And we were fascinated by it. So when we were asked to do the landscape for a very, very large corporate office, we decided to use that idea of multiple entries and simple grids, and decided to do this as a tribute to many ideas of nature, to really be able to create a place for birds, to start creating a court of lost trees, a place of produce, grasslands, and dining pavilions. The image on the right shows you all the arrows in the many, many ways in which you can traverse this garden. And you can enter it from many points, exit it from many points, and so on and so forth. What number two is really the Garden of Lost Trees, where we've gone and found trees that nobody plants anymore, and almost museum-like in each quadrant planted one tree. It's a film that I've also sent you. This is how it looks today. It begins as a regular sort of garden. There's a construction steel trellis that gets created in the center of the garden, and you walk down this trellis, and it allows you to walk on the left and right and enter courts, and each court has got one tree, which is a lost tree. And so there's a court of lost tree, as you can see the image on the left. The image on the right is showing you all the courts with the trees in their nascent form. This is an earlier image. Now they've, of course, grown a lot more. And then there are places where we grow herbs and things for the kitchen. There's a water body where there are islands of grasses, and birds come and use it for nesting, but it's only for the birds. And then there's a podium where there's parking below, and the podium has been converted into a grassland. And this is for a large corporate house. So for somebody like this to talk about a garden that is about humility, about just ideas of nature, ideas of sustainability, ideas of conservation, I think it was a powerful message and a powerful idea to do these sort of gardens. This is a very, very small garden for a family friend's daughter. She was building the house, and she had this piece of land in front, and she really wanted to plant the idea of wilderness in this little plant in front. So we did many sketches about how we would imagine this garden. And so that's one of the earlier sketches that we'd done. And we would always begin in the studio with doing hand drawings of that kind. And then from here, it converts itself into models and so on and so forth, and led to a very, very sort of detailed planting plan where we use species like the Jatropha's or the Nyctanthuses or the Chlorophytums or the Briars and so on and so forth. And they got deeply sort of woven into this garden, and it became a place like this. There's a little swing in the center. It's a place you can get lost. It's very, very small. The garden is barely 5,000 square feet large, but it's still a place that you can completely lose yourself very quickly. This is a garden that we've done many, many years back. It's a hotel. And can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can. Yes, we can. It's going perfectly. Yep.
Yes. So it's a hotel that was built. There was a devastated fort that was restored to make a hotel, and it was built along the edge of a mountain. So as you went up 100 feet, and as you went from level to level, you actually got ground because it was built along the edge of the mountain. And there were courts, and the courts had names. So there was, the royal court, there was the welcome court, there was the lotus court, there was the ladies' court. But of course, they were just names. There was nothing but earth, no sign or traces of what these courts could have been in the past. And we started looking at these courts and imagining different ideas. So we restored the water carrying systems of the fort. So all the water runs down these channels that you see on the left, and it gets gathered in a big underground sump. But much like the Mughal landscapes, the channels sort of lead you to the entrance, but with a difference that they keep bending every time there was something that was there that was important. So in the image on the left, you can see a jaroka, which is a stone carved balcony. So where that happened, the channel turned and paid respect to it. Or in the image on the right, you can see a temple, which is along the way. So the channel again turns and pays respect to the temple. And then from there, you enter into the entrance court. And this place is called Devi Gad. Devi means goddess. And so the two stones represent the idea of the goddess, and the Bohemia tree, almost like a blandishane, like a canopy, stays stunted and creates like a canopy over the goddesses as you enter the court. In the lotus court, we reimagined the idea of the lotus and drew a modern version of a very lazy water rill that travels 200 feet lazily and sort of falls into the court next door. In the royal court, we placed this throne of marble and planted the banana tree behind. The cyclical manner in which the tree would grow. And we changed the paving pattern slightly. So as the image in the center shows you, it's all black flooring, but it describes an orb, almost as if the throne sits at the edge of the cosmos and sees the manner in which the world is changing. In the ladies' court, there was an old swing that we restored. And then we designed this fountain where, unlike other fountains, the water goes inside. In most fountains, the water spews out. In this one, the water goes inside. And it was a tribute to the way in which women are very often treated in feudal lands, and where they internalize all their pain and they sort of get on with life. And the fountain really was a tribute to them. In other parts of it, we used the old Persian charbagh, the way it originally started, which started essentially to grow food. And in the center was a gravity-fed tank, and the water runs down the rails and floods each quadrant, and we grow vegetables there. And elsewhere, there are balconies where we carved these zigzag lines in the flooring and sort of brought the mountain beyond into the balcony. Or on the right, we got boulders and carved them and planted sansevierias, almost like headgear of the soldiers. And they were sort of placed somewhere at the back of the palace. And they were looking at the cleft in the valley, where the valley mountain is, and looking straight at it, almost as if they're waiting for war, but this war hopefully is never going to come. So there was part humor, part symbolism, part cultural narratives that are sort of built into this garden. This is the house that I was talking about, where we planted grasses, and it was a barren piece of land. We decided to build a house on two hillocks. The drawing shows the two hills where the house is built and the contours that go down. The lower area, of course, gets flooded because there's a mini river that floods occasionally. And the house gets built between the valley, but it's connected by a thin steel bridge. A lot of the initial work was about stabilizing the slopes, very poor water quality, very high salinity, very sandy soils, improving the nutrient value of the soil. A lot of work just went in stabilizing, in using grasses to start stabilizing the slopes, using cocoa logs, as you can see in the left, and embedding them to sort of arrest erosion. And slowly the garden became a story of a very formal garden and a wild garden. And it was the interplay between what was tamed and what was untamed. And the garden and the house really became the cusp from which you could enjoy the ideas of nature. So something that is very tame and very organized, and something that was wild. It begins with the steel bridge that starts cutting through the house. Along the way, sculpture starts presenting itself. The bridge on the left-hand side has the idea of the tame garden. It begins from the idea of the tame garden, but on the right-hand side is the idea of the wild garden. And then it descends, it passes through the house, and the image on the right shows it having cut through the house and descending back into the forest. So the idea of coming from something that is formal and going to something that is not, something that is tamed, to going to something that is wild, and the house became the place from where you view it. So it was really an allegory of the way that the world is and how we sort of begin to absorb many moods of the world. So that's how the house looks now, the two masses and the steel bridge in the middle. On the left-hand side is the tamed landscape, and it's a theater that has beautiful performances throughout the year. Some images of the landscape around the house. And to see from the top, you begin to see that steel bridge that runs through the theater, the more formal garden below or on the left. But as you go upwards in the image, that's where the sense of wilderness starts taking over. This is what we were talking about, the public parks, and we've talked about that a fair deal, so I won't explain it too much. But those are the kind of gardens, and those are the images of the kind of gardens that we got. And it was simple. It was about signage, hydrology, how to do good furniture, accessible entrances, simple things like waste bins, plant material, and biodiversity. And over the many years now, we've done 12 parks, 3 more in Ahmedabad going on. In Surat, 2 completed, 2 more that are going on. These are just some of the images of some of the smaller parks where we look at the idea of wilderness in the parks, or very, very small parks where we build trellises with different creepers. Or parks which have got large play spaces. Or very, very small parks, like pocket parks in parts of the city that are very dense, which just has a little bit of children's play equipment and a little place to sit. And these are the recent ones that we've opened in a neighboring city, which are refurbished parks that we just finished. This is another park in the neighboring city. Just to quickly tell you the 2 parks that are the big ones. This is Victoria, 125 years old, done to commemorate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. A bunch of citizens got together and sort of created this park. That was the original plan on the left. And then the city moved across the river and the park went into disrepair. It became a place for antisocial elements. People used to drink there, do drugs. It became a dumping yard for the city waste. It became a place where the city went and built their little offices there. And so that's the way that we actually found the park when we started work on it. It was completely decrepit and a waste dump. And we worked on it for a period of 3 years. This is the reimagined park again, where the sense of formality of the old Victorian plan kind of stays, but it still starts making space for everything that has happened in the last 100 years, which are a whole bunch of trees that were planted without a plan, but we didn't want to displace them, or parks had become smaller because the roads had widened. But the idea is to sort of nod your head towards history, but also slip in something that is new and hopefully without anybody noticing. Just detailed planting plans for it, we can discuss it at a later date for it. But the planting is a fairly detailed bit of work in the studio. And that's how the park looks now. That's a central quadrant. The top left are the seats. These parks are truly beautifully maintained. We've retained all the old vestiges of the park. This was an old fountain donated by a family which had lost their son. The water bodies, like the one on the right, were restored. New trellises were brought in and planted quite well. And of course, they're densely used. I mean, these parks get close to about 50,000 people using it every week. So they're intensely used parks. The forests of the park. There's a story behind it. There was Hillary Clinton came to pay her tributes to Elaben Bhatt, who was a very important founder of the Seva movement. It's a women's self-help group, which has 40,000 women as members. And she had started her organization from this park. And then when it turned 50, asked us to allow her to plant a tree, which, on the right-hand side, you can see a banyan tree that has been planted. And of course, she died just a few months later. So we did a little memorial for her. And now it's become a place where everybody comes and pays the respect to Elaben. This is the other garden, extremely popular in town. Again, great sense of disrepair. But there were bits of things that we held on to, the brick chimneys, which are representative of Ahmedabad's textile history, Bougainvillea Arbor that was in a state of disrepair. But the rest of the park, of course, was in a particularly bad shape. And that was the original plan. This was the modified plan where we held whatever we could and saved all the trees and, of course, redesigned the entire garden. And this is how it begins to look in the middle of the city, a little green island there. The water body has been restored, a whole lot of new planting. Bird life has come back. Intensely used. I mean, this is really a park where the entire theater of human activities expresses itself here. I mean, they're old people, they're young people, they're painting competitions, there are dancers who come to practice it, there are photographers who spend their time here taking photographs of young people who are getting married or have their birthdays, there are theater workshops. I mean, the whole world happens in this park. There was these chimneys that were representative of the textile history, and we got a sculptor to build these monkeys to kind of, remind us that all good things have to end, and finally life does make a monkey out of us. So, for us, it's a circle of things of the way the city's economic cycles have also changed. That's the park. This is a project, this is a real estate project where on a land like this, we were asked to build 100 homes and lay roads. And as you can see, extremely fragile soil. There were trees, and we studied the tree cover, the hydrology in great detail, and evolved at a master plan where the houses could be located. And of course, it went to very detailed planting plans, very detailed grading. Because what we did is we shifted earth over 120 acres and reshaped the hills while saving all the trees and while introducing an idea of wilderness into this very, very large piece of land. This is how the land really was. And then we started remodeling the entire land while saving each tree, but also beginning to imagine where the road would happen, where the houses could get sited, and where the water bodies are likely to go through. And something like this, we've been working now for a year and a half, and now it begins to look like this. So completely sort of sense of wilderness has been reinstalled on this ground using very, very local sort of flora, but taking care of all the existing trees or the large shrubs. Roads are now laid. There's a whole new planting. All the slopes are now just stabilized with planting. There's no mechanical stabilization. And the last one, this is again a site which was like, this is 20 acres. We started just making drawings of how the soil of the site would be, water moves on the site, how, different kinds of scattered shrubs or grasses grow on the site, to get a sense of what, just to feel the land. We heard birds and started mapping their sounds. And the plan finally became something like this. There was a large lake that we wanted to build in the middle, and we wanted to build 2 houses and a public pavilion and a small temple, and planned the idea of wilderness. But at the same time, as you can see on the squares on top, which is number 6, to plan the idea of produce. So the idea of produce, the now at 4, 7, and 8 is the idea of theater and cacti and a maze. And then, of course, the lake is in the middle. And we, the way that would work, we would do studies, we would do models, we'd analyze sight lines, do many hand drawings, many drawings just to talk about the mood of the planting and just how morphologically planting needed to move. the right image on the right starts mapping all the sight lines to start deciding what we want to see from where. We would make models to study the same thing. And detail planting, of course. And different components would be imagined in many ways, how the maize garden could be imagined, or the cactus gardens could be imagined, leading up to the final master plan. And then the lake started getting dug and it started getting lined. And that's how it looked a couple of years back, while work was still going on. And that's how it begins now to look. This is again about 8 months old, but that's how it is beginning to look like now, where the gardens of produce, the water body, maize, and the idea of wilderness that now gets planted, and a little temple that appears in the middle of this wilderness. Some details of the temple, a water rill in the middle, and some interesting, highly detailed space, a theater for performances. Just the kind of planting that's beginning to take root now. And the lake itself, the little jetty. That's it. That's. I hope I have not exceeded my time too much.
Not at all. That
That's
was
fascinating. Really,
yeah,
really so
absolutely.
interesting, so inspiring.
Yeah. Oh, really wonderful. It just makes me want to come to India tomorrow. It's just so exciting. And the range of projects. I love the range of projects. I love the detailing. We could go on for hours with you. It's just absolutely enthralling. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'm these glitches that have happened. And
oh no, don't worry.
Not to worry. No, we'll edit those out. No, it's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. Super work.
Thank you very much. And if you need anything between today and tomorrow,
we'll do.
Please let me know and we'll send it.
Yeah, we'll do. Yes.
Absolute pleasure meeting you. You've been very kind, very patient, very gracious.
It's our pleasure. It's just a joy to see such beautiful work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much indeed, and most interesting. And so we'll very much look forward to sharing this with our audience.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, yes.
Oh, God, let's go to India.
Yes, I mean, I think he was younger than me actually, but I wasn't. I just didn't know. And there's that whole thing I was trying to explain about sort of the older Indian generation can be quite sort of difficult to handle. But no, he was great, and I mean, their work is just amazing. There's so.
Oh my God!
And partly it's a reflection of just how much India has changed in the last 10 years. That there's money for all those kind of projects, both private and public.
I know. That is fascinating, isn't it? Just fascinating.
Yeah, really. I mean,
I love, well, his philosophy that, garden design and landscape architecture, there are no boundaries. It's just the space between buildings, which is, what was it? Yeah, is it Beasley's book on design? But I love their approach. And the detailing on the planting and just lovely, really lovely. What a lovely man.
Yes, no, I really liked him. I'd like to spend more time looking at their website and think about what we could get.
No, I was looking through the website when he was chatting. I'll do a few more social media things, because I think it's, how often do we get to see inside India in this?
Yeah.
I mean, and it could, it would be lovely to go in deeper onto maybe one or two projects, or for him to talk more about his philosophy, because he's obviously, deep thinker and and a very good speaker.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
No, it was great. I'm really pleased how all that worked out. Yes.
Good. Well done. Well done.
Glad you were able to join us as well.
Yeah, no, God, I'm so pleased. That's
Yes.
fantastic. So tomorrow, and then of course, like the preamble would make a perfect podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
And then we could say, if you want to have a look at these gorgeous pictures, go to YouTube, because and send people over. So that's great. That's good. Okay.
Great. Good.
While I've got you on, is there anything else we need to chat about?
I don't think there is. No, not at the moment.
Well, it'll be. I'll join. I mean, it's 8 o'clock for me tomorrow night, but that should be fine.
Basically, just a case of playing a recording. So
Yeah. Okay. And everything else is going all right. Anything else that's pending or?
I don't think so.
With Henrik. I'll email him and say, how does Anna pay him? I wonder if I might even just try a simple bank transfer and see what happens. It's just
they're not necessarily expensive. I mean,
no, but I just suddenly noticed before I pressed yes to Wise that they were charging us £40 to do.
Yes.
And that I've never known.
The whole point of Wise, I thought, was to reduce these charges.
A couple of quid, yeah.
I mean, I make charges from First Direct, which is an HSBC company to Portugal, and I don't pay that much. And
I'll have a try through. I'll ask him how Anna does it, whether it's just a simple bank transfer, because I think we've got all the information we need.
Yeah.
But I just luckily sort of saw that and thought, that's weird. Normally it's a few quid or a fiver or something.
Yes, yeah.
40 quid seems a bit much.
Oh, yes,
so we need to wait to know how much to invoice the LI for that, because there's going to be in terms of what we're invoicing them.
Yeah,
we need information for them first, don't we? Yeah.
Well, they need to sort out. Basically, they've taken the money, so they sort that out. And I've told Hella. So
yeah. How's Joe feeling today?
Well, she just got up. I think she might have turned a corner, but she's been really ill for 10 days or so with this gastric thing, which, it could just be an infection that's taken rather a long time to shake off, or it could be side effects. But so we don't really know. But she just now, she does seem to be saying she might have turned a corner. So
good. And really her immune system must be severely.
Well, yeah, that probably could well be it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else.
Good.
Yeah, all righty. And what I'll do is I will ask Lena if we can do a podcast, her and I, on
that'd be brilliant. Yes,
her backstory, what she does, how she does it, etc. Her thoughts, and then maybe with Viva we could do a Thursday Garden chat later on, because she works for the local council, but she's also got a project in Spain that she does.
Interesting. Yeah, let's get her.
She's a very dynamic character, lovely character. Yeah. Great. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And I need to send you. I'll do it today because I can do it. Send you that preamble into Fisherman's Bay.
Oh yes.
And I'll send you photos of that too.
Great.
I think I have sent you. I haven't sent you Joe. Have I sent you Joe's yet? I can't remember. Joe Wakelin's podcast.
No.
Okay, so I'll send you Joe's and also photos from there too. Okay, I'll do that today because I think I should be able to do that without any problem.
Great. Good.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think we both really enjoyed that, didn't we?
Absolutely. No, it was a really insightful, and I think makes us want to do a Garden Masterclass trip to India.
Oh, well, it does. Yes. Clearly, there is a lot going on there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is very, 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 very inventive, and they're developing a new way because there isn't really the sort of obvious historical precedents. So
I think what's really nice is their process, and the way he describes the process of design. It's very understandable, and he's very informative. So that was very insightful.
Yeah. I mean, I think we'd like to sort of continue discussion with them to see what perhaps maybe we could involve them in some webinars, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Good, great. Okay, well,
right.
No questions for others. So I'll see if I can get that extra 5 minutes, find that wherever that's gone.
Yes, I popped the website in the chat for everybody to have a look at their website anyway. So that you can explore a bit further if you want to.
Yeah, great. Good. Okay, well, I hope you get too cold, Annie.
Thank you. Yes, I do too. I've got to teach tomorrow. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Bye.
cheerio, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.